other shows where they kind of have very strong allegorical, metaphorical characters. And that just means that, there are characters that are metaphors for people and situations. Like Ed Wuncler's character is supposed to be George W. Bush as a Whigger, and Gin Rumey's character, played by Samuel Jackson, is supposed to be Donald Rumsfeld. And, for a lot of people who are younger, the Bush administration was responsible for the war in Iraq, and it caused a lot of problems for Americans. So they were really seen as bad guys for that whole situation, and it's definitely satirized very deeply in the Boondocks. And through my review of this episode, I'm going to stop at a couple of points to talk about the themes of this episode. So, first of all, what happens is Ed and Jin are both staging a robbery with the help of Riley Freeman. So, first of all, they're both on their phones talking about technology. And the reason why they do that is for two reasons. That, number one, Jin's voice actor is played by Samuel L. Jackson. So, obviously, they want to, spoof Pulp Fiction by just having a long conversation on the phone. They eat burgers. Because in the opening scene of Pulp Fiction with Samuel Jackson, John Travolta, they're talking about the Royale with cheese. They say nigga technology a bunch of times. So more than likely, that's kind of a metaphor for two things. That obviously in Pulp Fiction and Quentin Tarantino movies, Quentin Tarantino used the word nigger and nigga a bunch of times because Tarantino was inspired by blaxploitations, but also he wanted to sound cool. So it's a homage to that, but also it could be a sense of George W. Bush and the Bush administration speaking down to African Americans and other groups of people. And I think that this was during the time of Hurricane Katrina, so it's kind of like hints at possible racism in the White House. And then what happens is that, they go to the bank and actually Riley's there and Riley helps them out. So maybe it's a metaphor for the government encouraging, minorities or black youth to go along with them, and Bush encouraging minorities to go along with war, because usually when you see commercials, people enlisting, they usually feature a lot of minorities, or they usually try to recruit people in minority communities because of the idea of poor social, like they're poor people, so they're always looking for jobs and other things like that. The next thing that I'm going to say is that then they rob the bank and they shoot guns in the air and stuff like that, and nobody pays attention. So it shows, and then later it's revealed that the bank's actually owned by Ed's grandfather. So the point of it is kind of like maybe that idea that, first of all, they're incompetent criminals, and also nobody really cares about the crimes they commit. So it's like the idea of how, upper class white people usually can get away with murder and other crimes. As they say in a later episode, some people are above the law and it is what it is. And then also too that, it also is satirizing the incompetence of George W. Bush and also and also Donald Rumsfeld for engaging the war, wasting a lot of resources. And in the end of the day, they go home to their mansions while people pick up the scraps. Because why would you go to a bank that's robbed by who's gonna eventually own it in a couple of years? So it's about like how they go home to a mansion, and the banker has to deal with the repercussions of them robbing it in front of a bunch of people. And the fact that they shoot at the place and nobody cares kind of shows that this is kind of like a very common theme. So the next scene is that Huey forbids Riley to go see Ed and Jin. And what happens is that they engage into a fight. And there's two reasons for this. That first of all, in the earlier episode with Granddad's fight, it kind of showed that Huey knows a lot about martial arts. So I think that they're trying to show off that they can actually have an actual fight. And then there are later episodes where Huey fights. So they're trying to really establish that Huey has combat abilities, and so does Riley. And a lot of people kind of point out that they like this fight because actually see Huey smile, and that's the only time in the whole entire series you see him kind of smile and look kind of happy and stuff like that. But it's also kind of a metaphor for saying how there are a bunch of people there's a bunch of families and there's a bunch of people in America who disagree with Bush or for Bush, or see him as a criminal, not see him as a criminal. And and then Granddad gets involved, and he says that Riley can go see Ed and Jen. And I kind of looked at this as that, once again, that Robert Freeman wants to be on Ed Wensler's grandfather's good side. So he's kind of like saying, you know what, you can go because of that. And the reason, the deeper meaning of it is how Robert is an old black man, and he knows that he wants to make Ed happy, Ed's grandfather happy. So, Ed Wensler III gets to hang out with Riley. So he's doing whatever he can to just make this old white man very, very happy, even if it means like his grandson hangs out with him. And, later on in the episode, what happens is that they come up with a plot to nab Oprah. So what happens, and I know I'm getting a little tired because this is a long thing to analyze, is that when they rob Oprah, they shoot up a Borders bookshop, and it's kind of a metaphor for the violence and senseless violence that's engaged in Iraq, and all the people being hurt. And then also because it's happening on American soil, the shooting, it's also kind of a metaphor for not only the violence in Iraq, but also the violence that is inflicted on the people serving in war. And then also when we're at home, people come back with trauma and forms of PTSD, and they can engage in violence against their families. So it's a metaphor for the senseless violence. And in the end of the day, you see the same thing happen, that Ed and Jen go home, and there's no consequences, and a police officer comes and gives him his wallet. So that's also a metaphor of saying, you know what, maybe just the Bush and Rumsfeld walk away with a big wallet, and the cops don't even care that they're walking with a big wallet because they make money off of Iraq. So that's a good metaphor. And then later on in the episode, they do a second attempt, and what happens is it gets failed because they accidentally steal Bill Cosby. The first one, they steal Maya Angelou, and when they take Maya Angelou, there's a bag on her head, and that's kind of, to me, a metaphor for Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay, because they used to put bags on people's head when they waterboarded them, and they did and they sexually assaulted prisoners in Abu Ghraib and other things like that. And then the next thing that I would say is that the last part with Rob and Bill Cosby is a reminder of their incompetence. And then also they mentioned that they're in special ops. So one thing about George W. Bush, that he was an incompetent soldier, and he got a lot of privileges for serving when he was in the military during the Vietnam War. He was definitely protected and put in an environment where he wouldn't get hurt or face actual combat in Vietnam. So this episode's kind of like a reminder that while George Bush is a war veteran, he was incompetent. And then also he's an alcoholic, Ed Wensler's character. So it's kind of a metaphor for Ed Wensler and Bush both having alcohol issues and mental health issues that they're not going to care about. They're going to throw money at it and focus on the bigger problem. So just to wrap this all up, this is a very, very cerebral episode of the Boondocks. And it really also establishes the relationship between Gin Rummy, Ed Wensler, and Riley. And then it also establishes Huey as this character that also has fighting abilities. But it also is a very powerful usage of the Ed Wensler and Gin Rummy characters as metaphors for George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld. And that's actually very, very cerebral. Like the later episodes of the Boondocks, I think the last 5 episodes of the first season, you kind of see that they're doing a lot more character-driven episodes. So this is like Ed and Jin's episode ultimately, and then the Passion of Uncle Ruckus, the Passion of Reverend Ruckus is more of Huey's character development, and Riley Was Here is more of Riley's development. And I believe Wingman is the episode where Granddad's relative passes away. So if I have it correct, so I haven't seen the episode in a couple of years, but that's kind of more of Granddad's development. And in that episode, Granddad just has a disagreement with a relative that was an asshole to him. So the last couple episodes, you're seeing very strong character development episodes. And I do think this episode's very, very cerebral, and I recommend Let's Nab Oprah. To me, it's one of the best episodes. And I'm also kind of happy that, I also used ChatGPT to fact check a lot of my facts about Bush and other things like that. And I also saw the commentary on YouTube. So definitely there's a lot of people who back my analysis that I created here that is kind of a metaphor for the Bush administration and the war in Iraq and the chaos that they're causing, and how white privilege and wealth privilege and class privilege prevents consequences, and the cycle of government exploiting, and the cycle of the military industry complex, and the lack of consequences for people actually starting wars or justifying wars. And then also too, with the nabbing of Oprah, that's kind of like a metaphor for George Bush and Donald Rumsfeld hijacking the media, so that way they because with weapons of mass destruction, people knew that there wasn't any in Iraq, and they came up with stories, and they kept on going on with stories, and they said that possibly it's there. And then what actually happened was this led to the war in Iraq. So it's almost like the idea of the Bush administration hijacking the media outlets and using the news and whatever to kind of put in people's heads that there could possibly be weapons in Iraq, and then actually they make the excuse, and then the war starts and all that. So it's definitely something. And then also too, that last thing I'll say is that with Ed Wuncler and Jim Rummy being like these white guys, these rich white guys in the black culture, that's also like a metaphor to the bravado and machismo that George Bush and Donald Rumsfeld wish they can have. Like, they want to be seen as these great political figures, just like you look at FDR, who was president during the invasion of Pearl Harbor in World War II, and then you also look at Abraham Lincoln, who was president during the Civil War, and when Fort Sumter got invaded, and which started the Civil War and the separation of the states. So the whole entire, Wigger and the black, and trying to be these black machismo characters, are the idea that they want to be seen as these bravado and tough figures, the same way George Bush and Donald Rumsfeld want to be seen as, or create the illusion that they are the same as FDR going to war during World War II, which was a very justified war, or the Civil War with Lincoln, which was a very justified war. All right, that's all I got to say about Let's Nab Oprah. Definitely a very, very cerebral episode.